Welcome to the fourth biennial New England Women's Policy Conference, organized by the UMass Center for Women in Politics and Public Policy. My name is Maria Rosario Gonzalez Albuisek, and I am the Director of Communications and Immigrant Health at an organization called Healthcare for All. I have also been a member of the External Advisory Board for the Center for almost 5 years. And most importantly, I'm going to be your MC for the day. So every 2 years, many of us look forward to gather at UMass Boston in one of the ballrooms, looking into the bay to hear from extraordinary women from throughout the region. The conference brings together hundreds of women who are committed to bring change to their community, their city, their town, or their state. It is a great opportunity to connect with one another and share our vision and best practices for social justice and policy change. This year is going to be different. We won't be able to have side conversations with amazing women sitting at our table during the breaks or the lunch. However, as we look at each other's faces through the screen of our computers during the next 3 mornings, I want you to use your imagination and believe that we're all together in the same room, living this experience and getting inspired, motivated, and ready to gear into action. So I know that we don't have much time, but I'm going to ask you for 2 seconds to close your eyes and imagine that you're looking at the water through the window and that you have amazing women sitting next to you. Now open your eyes. We're all here. We're all together, and we have a great day ahead of us, full of great conversation. And this is what you can expect for the next 3 hours. We're gonna hear opening remarks from key people at the UMass Boston University. We're gonna have an opening plenary with the title Women Leading Change, Perspectives and Policies from Elected Officials. We're going to head into breakout sessions where we're going to have very interesting conversations, and then we're going to wrap up with closing remarks. And without further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Lori Insaya Jefferson to start off our opening remarks. Dr. Lori Insaya Jefferson is the director of the Center for Women in Politics and Public Policy and their Gender, Leadership, and Public Policy Graduate Certificate Program. She is an expert on the intersection of race, class, and gender in health, healthcare, and social policy. She is a co-chair of this conference, and I am pleased to hand it over to her for her welcoming remarks. Dr. Lori?
Thank you, Maria, for that wonderful introduction. Good morning. Greetings from the Center for the Women in Politics and Public Policy. I am more than thrilled to be here today. Throughout the next few days, we will address and highlight opportunities, challenges, and strategies to improve the lives of women and girls, particularly those of color in New England. Ella Barker declared, in order for us as poor and oppressed people to become part of a society that is meaningful, the system under which we now exist has to be radically changed. It means facing a system that does not lend itself to your needs and devising means by which you change that system. Scheduled for December 2nd through the 4th as a virtual event, this year's New England Women's Policy Conference is entitled, The Time is Now, Gender, Justice, Anti-Racism, and Systemic Change, and seeks to utilize an intersectional lens taking into account inequities related to race, gender identity, ethnicity, class, sexual preference, immigrant status, and other social identities to address the economic, security, health, and well-being of women, their families, and their communities. Our vision is to make this year's New England Women's Policy Conference an engaging collaboration to imagine together how we can transform inequitable systems in New England and beyond. This year at the 4th Biennial Women's Policy Conference, we explicitly focused on anti-racism, intersectionality, and promoting women's leadership, especially among young women and women of color, through systemic change, a radical transformation, a bright, bold, and transparent light to move us forward. What does anti-racism look like? We hear the word so much these days, but what does it mean? In a publication from the National Action Committee on the Status of Women, International Perspectives, Women in Global Security, Anti-racism is the active process of identifying and eliminating racism by changing systems, organizational structures, policies and practices and attitudes so that power is redistributed and shared equity. What we must remember is that becoming an anti-racist is always a work in progress, seldom yields perfection, and differs depending on who you are and the context of where you are. Furthermore, the Global Fund for Women defined gender justice as a systemic redistribution of power, opportunities, and access for people of all genders through the dismantling of harmful structures, including patriarchy, homophobia, and transphobia. If you notice, in each definition, systemic and structural change are mentioned. How do we move forward and get there is the question and focus of this conference. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge many who have supported this event, including the Chancellor of UMass Boston, Marcelo, Saares, Orozco, and Dean David Cash, and Associate Dean and Professor Kiki Adozi from the McCormick Graduate School, and of course, the New England Women's Policy Initiative Steering Committee, who worked for months planning and organizing this event, along with the co-chair of the conference and NUPI program coordinator, Denise Morrow, who worked tirelessly and did a superb job to pull this conference together. Kudos, Denise. I would also like to thank my staff member, Muna Cullenback, who supported the communications aspect of the conference and kept our GLPP students in the loop about the event, and Krista Kelleher, our research and policy director, and other staff who pitched in whenever they were needed. Please take a look at the acknowledgements page, as there are so many throughout the university who supported the implementation of this conference. I would also be remiss if we did not acknowledge the many organizations who sponsored the event, including the EOS Foundation, Ignite National, the YWCA Boston, the Barbara Lee Family Foundation, the McCormick School of Policy and Global Studies, and their Racial Equity Task Force, our ethnic institutes, Amplify Latinx, among other nonprofit organizations, educational institutions, and entities that are highlighted in the program book. I would also like to acknowledge our advisory board members and former fellows who are in attendance today, as well as Ann Bookman, the former director of the Center for Women in Politics and Public Policy. To learn more about the New England Women's Policy Initiative, I will prompt you to go to our website. However, in brief, the New England Women's Policy Initiative is a long-term, nonpartisan effort to advance economic security, health, and well-being of women and their families. NUPI is spearheaded by the Center for Women in Politics and Public Policy and co-convened by regional partners, including women's commissions, women's funds, and nonprofit organizations serving women, and particularly women of color, in the 6 New England states. The co-conveners of the first New England Women's Policy Conference drafted the call to action to focus attention on key policy issues needed to advance women's economic security. A call to action 2021 will be created based on our research, recent convenings, including today's conference, and the best scholarship on women and girls. An overview of the conference is the following. Our keynote speaker will be Representative Ayanna Pressley, who will offer remarks tomorrow. I can't wait to hear her. Policy topics addressed by panelists and interactive discussions during our breakout tracks will include health and healthcare, child care and education, low wage and essential workers, and policing women of color and LGBTQ communities. As in 2018, we are partnering with Ignite, the national nonpartisan organization promoting young women's engagement in the political process, to host high school and college-age women participants in our Young Women's Leadership Track, where they receive policy and political training. The final day of the conference will bring together representatives from many organizations in New England that have been working on pressing issues related to our conference topics and discuss ways to move forward to build a coalitional policy agenda. At the conference, we will imagine together how we can eliminate inequitable systems through transformative policies. The Center for Women in Public Policy's vision is to make this conference relevant and energizing to motivate us toward effective action by engaging with pressing issues. Thank you so much, and I look forward to our convening over the next few days. And what I'd like to do now, I have the distinct honor and privilege of introducing our Chancellor, Marcelo Saares Orozco is Chancellor of the University of Massachusetts, Boston. Prior to his return to the Commonwealth, the Chancellor served as the inaugural UCLA Wasserman Dean and Distinguished Professor of Education. His research focuses on conceptual and empirical problems in the areas of cultural psychology and psychological anthropology, with a focus on the study of mass migration, globalization, and education. He is the author of numerous scholarly essays, award-winning books, edited volumes, and scholarly papers in a range of disciplines and languages in international journals. What I love to say is that I am very, very excited about having our new chancellor on UMass's campus. I think that he's an extraordinary leader in so many ways, and I look forward to meeting him in person, and I also look forward to the leadership that he's going to bring to the university. Thank you so much, Marcelo, and I'm looking forward to your remarks.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Laura, for that wonderful, wonderful introduction. That's the kind of introduction that my father would have liked and my mother would have believed. I'm so happy to say good morning. My name is Marcelo Saares Orozco, and I have the honor and responsibility of serving as Chancellor of Boston's great public research university, the University of Massachusetts, Boston. While I wish we could do this in person, I have to welcome you to Mundo Zoom, to this important conference hosted by the Center for Women and Politics and Public Policy of the McCormick Graduate School. The Center for Women, Politics and Public Policy is a beacon in the Commonwealth and the world on research, translational work, practice, and activism on the defining issues flowing from gender, politics, power, and opportunity. Its research, now historically and moving forward, guides policymakers at all levels of government on matters of urgent relevance to the practice of democratic citizenship. In convening events like today, the center acts as a factory for engineering new solutions, new policies on the pressing issues of the day. Today, our nation faces the grave threat of three concurrent pandemics. First, the COVID-19 epidemic, leaving death and untold suffering, above all in our most underserved communities. Second, the structures of sexism, racism, xenophobia, homophobia, transphobia, and their vicious synergies and complex intersections represent a grave threat to the practice of democratic citizenship in our city, in our Commonwealth, in our world. Third, growing inequality, most profoundly shaping the experiences, identities, and opportunities of our racialized communities, above all, women and girls of color, including our Black, Indigenous, and Latinx hermanas y hermanes. This cries for a commitment to engineer new structures of opportunity, new structures of hope via urgently needed new policies that are at once smarter, more humane, more sustainable, indeed life-enhancing. It is a great honor for me to serve as Chancellor of UMass Boston, a university that here and now reasserts an education agenda, a research agenda, a policy agenda, an activism agenda, animated by an ethic of care and solidarity, an ethic of dignity and human rights, an ethic of engagement and service to others. Sexism, racism, hatred, police brutality stand in complete opposition to a humanist civilization and to the elemental requirements for the practice of democratic citizenship in the 21st century. Sexist and racist violence and destruction bequeath an empire of suffering in every city, large and small. Its victims include those who we hear of in the news. An innocent woman, Breonna Taylor, murdered in her own apartment. A Black trans man, Tony McDade, shot by police. And the barbaric murder of a pleading George Floyd by the police in Minnesota. But there are so many more lives lost that have not made the headlines. As scholars, practitioners, activists who are committed to social justice, we reflect in our own privileges, and we must act in all that we do against systemic racism, sexism that impacts our communities, the families, the children that we must serve. We must address sexism, racism, anti-Blackness, and its impact on the lives and opportunities of our brothers and sisters of color. It is with great pleasure that I now turn the program, and indeed the title says it all. The time is now. Gender justice, anti-racism, and systemic change is what our world is crying for. It's what our world is clamoring for. Today and in the next 3 days, you have a busy, important agenda addressing fundamental topics, fundamental concerns at the heart of our endeavors to re-engineer our economy and society, to put us on a path to a more humane, to a more sustainable, to a more inclusive development moving forward. I am deeply honored to welcome you, and now I turn it over to our scholars who will lead us over the next 3 days. Thank you. Muchas gracias y felicidades.
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much, Chancellor Marcelo Saares Orozco. Thank you very much as well, Dr. Lori and Saya Jefferson, for those inspiring, passionate remarks. I think we're all starting with a lot of energy and a lot of really willingness to tackle all these issues that were mentioned today. And now I would like to introduce Dean Dr. David Cash. Dr. David Cash is the Dean of the McCormack Graduate School of Policy and Global Studies at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. Prior to his role at UMass Boston, Dr. Cash spent the prior decade in Massachusetts state government in leadership roles, catalyzing transformation of the Commonwealth's energy and environmental policy, regulatory, and business landscape. Please join me in welcoming Dean Cash.
Thank you so much, Maria, and thank you so much, Dr. Nsai Jefferson, and my goodness, what an introduction from our new chancellor. And for those of you who have not yet met him, now you understand why we chose him after a lengthy international search. Unbelievable passion, scholarship, and action he combines. It's just remarkable that now as our leader, we have someone who fundamentally understands that scholarship and intellectual endeavors must be leveraged to solve the biggest problems, the biggest challenges, seize the biggest opportunities of our times. And we are so grateful to have as our new Chancellor, Chancellor Saares Orozco. It's wonderful, wonderful to be part of the team that he's now leading. I'm not going to speak long because I can't speak any more passionately than either Lori or Marcelo spoke, but I do want to remind folks that we sat together 4 years ago, a week after the 2016 election. I had the honor then of introducing Senator Elizabeth Warren, and there was a palpable fear in the audience. And it was a fear, unfortunately, that was realized. We've seen for the last 4 years a diminution in our focus and our ability to follow the rule of law. We've seen the rights of women decreased over this time. We have seen the embrace of structural racism, the denial and embrace of it. So it is perfect that for this meeting, the time is now. The time is now. We have a new administration coming into office and a reawakening of the concerns that are at the bedrock of this country, the history of this country. And it is now is the opportunity for us to do exactly what we are doing today. I love, Maria, in your introduction of imagining us together. True, we need to imagine us shoulder to shoulder, but we also don't need to imagine because that's what we are. That's what this community has been. That's what the Center for Women in Politics and Public Policy has spent decades creating, this kind of community that is poised to seize the opportunity now. And the next 3 days are going to be a wonderful opportunity for us to work together to seek those solutions and understand the challenges. So thank you very much. And thank you so much for the Center for Women in Politics and Public Policy, Dr. Nsai Jefferson, Denise Murrow, of course, Krista Kelleher, Muna Killenbach, and all of the folks who have been part of the advisory team. Thank you so much and have a wonderful next couple of days.
Thank you very much, Dean Cash. You definitely had a lot to add to of value to the conversation. And now we are ready to move to our opening plenary. Women leading change, perspectives and policies from elected officials. And this opening plenary will highlight the perspective of public officials in New England regarding the impacts of police violence, COVID-19, the economic downturn, child and healthcare, and other relevant social challenges as they relate to women, women of color, and young women. Policy strategies and other initiatives to address these challenges will be also highlighted. And it is my pleasure to introduce the moderator for the opening plenary, Charlotte Guller Ritchie. We're together on the board, so it is certainly really a pleasure for me. Charlotte Guller Ritchie is an experienced leader and administrator with a background in public service, political activism, and civil rights. A past distinguished public service fellow at the Center for Women in Politics and Public Policy, she was recently named to the center as interim board chair. Charlotte is a former state representative, commissioner for the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination, housing chief and neighborhood development director, and she was also the city of Boston's first African-American woman to run for mayor. Welcome, Charlotte.
Thank you so much, Maria. And it's the honor of being on stage with you. This virtual stage is equal, really. I'm so happy. If you're just joining this conference now, to our audience, Maria Gonzalez Albuquerque is just a wonderful leader in her own right, and I appreciate you for your support of women and what you're doing on the healthcare front. Good morning, everyone. Charlotte Gola-Ritchie is my name. I am the interim board chair, as Maria said, for the Center for Women in Politics and Public Policy, which is one of the lead organizers for this conference, along with the steering committee, which I want to thank for convening the conference. I want to thank certainly Dr. Lori and Saya Jefferson and her entire team. And I also want to recognize Chancellor Saares, Orozco, and Dean Cash for their support. It would be hard to do this without their support, and for them to be here means a lot. And so here we are, the first panel of a 3-day conference. And yes, I'm going to try to, as your moderator, to guide us through the next 50 minutes of discussion with 3 dynamic women leaders. They were elected to districts in 3 New England states, and we are going to hear from them. I will have a chance to pose questions to them, and I'm excited to learn their points of view, to hear their responses. So while we will not, and I should say, have the, so the audience understands, we will not have a chance for audience interaction during this particular session, we will provide you with the panelists' contact information, and you can be in touch with them following today's session. So let's move forward and meet our 3 panelists. The first panelist, State Representative Jillian Gilchrist. We'll also meet Counselor at Large Samantha Pearlman, and I'm pleased to introduce State Senator-elect Keisha Ram. I'll start with our state rep. State Representative Jillian Gilchrist serves on the Connecticut General Assembly representing West Hartford. Last month, she was reelected to her 2nd term in office. She's a trained social worker and first arrived in the legislature in 2018 with a wealth of policy experience, having advocated for women's health and safety in a variety of roles. She was director of the Health Professional Outreach for the Connecticut Coalition Against Domestic Violence, worked as a senior policy analyst for a state's Permanent Commission on the Status of Women. She served as executive director for NARAL Pro-Choice Connecticut, and was also director of policy and communications for Connecticut's Alliance to End Sexual Violence. Today, in addition to her legislative responsibilities, Rep. Gilchrist is the mother of 2, raising her family in West Hartford. Welcome, Rep. Gilchrist. Next, let's meet Counselor Samantha Pearlman. Samantha Pearlman is serving her 1st term as an at-large counselor here in Massachusetts in the city of Marlborough. With her election in 2019, Counselor Pearlman made history at age 24 as the youngest woman ever elected to the Marlborough City Council. Her council job is technically part-time, although I bet it comes with Counselor Pearlman's full-time commitment. Along with carrying out her responsibility as an at-large counselor, she also serves as a part-time civic engagement manager with a research and policy nonprofit, and she volunteers as board chair for her city's cultural council. Counselor Pearlman is a proud graduate of Emerge, which recruits and trains Democratic women to run for office, and she hopes to pass on her knowledge and experience to the next generation of women leaders who seek to win seats in their elective bodies. Welcome, Counselor Pearlman. Our 3rd panelist is State Senator-elect Keisha Ram. She made history in her state of Vermont last month as the first ever woman of color to win a seat in that legislative body. Prior to her Senate victory, Senator-elect Keisha Ram served in the Vermont House of Representatives, and that was back in 2008, where she made history then as the country's that's the country, not just Vermont, country's youngest legislator at the time. Keisha's non-elective experience includes work as a civic engagement specialist for the city of Burlington and as legal advocacy director for the nonprofit called Steps to End Domestic Violence.
Hi, good morning, everyone. This is Julie Proud-Ray. We're just waiting for a few more people to join.
Welcome. We're actually recording, so please put your Zoom on mute. And I will finish this introduction of Senator-elect Keisha Ram. So now you have met the three panelists, and we are now going to learn, we know something about their background and experience from my abbreviated introduction. You can find out certainly more about them during the course of this program on the website and also by going to their own websites. These are three remarkable women, and we are happy to have them with us this morning. Now we're going to hear a little bit about their perspectives, goals, and challenges as they lead their communities through the end of this year and into 2021. As the Chancellor and Dean Cash and Chancellor Saares Orozco mentioned, and Dr. Nsaya Jefferson, 2020 has been quite a year. And we know all that has happened. I mean, from, as the Chancellor was saying, from the strife, the pandemic, the racial unrest, sexism, racism, and other isms, the homophobia, xenophobia, and so on, all that we have seen, the downturn in the economy, it's been a lot this year. And there's been the resultant strife and uncertainty that families have faced, continue to face. So here's my first question. With all that has occurred this year, was there one issue or event that had particular meaning for you because of its effect on your district or on the lives of the people whom you serve, or because of its effect on your own life? And if so, why was that particular issue event especially meaningful for you? Let's go in alphabetical order. That'll make things easy. So we'll start with State Representative Jillian Gilchrist. Jillian?
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And I'm just so pleased to be here today. So certainly COVID-19 has had an impact on my community, and I really had to translate into my social work skills to support folks in the community. But to answer your question, the event that had the most impact, this past summer in Connecticut, we went into special session, and we were called into special session to do a number of things, one being a police accountability bill. And so in light of the racial tensions and the police violence, we decided to take action in the state of Connecticut. And so we had a very comprehensive bill with one key component that caused quite a bit of controversy, which was an element to try and change qualified immunity in the state of Connecticut by giving those who have their rights violated civil recourse to seek civil remedies in our state. And unfortunately, this became a conflict between law enforcement and those in the Black community. And why this had such an impact on me and my learning as a white feminist is that it was an opportunity to stop and listen to leaders in the Black community who were saying, this is what we need. I come from a community where it is predominantly white, but on most lawns in my community, folks have Black Lives Matter signs. And in my community, we declared racism a public health crisis. And so I listened to leaders and I fought to keep that provision in the bill because what that provision does is holds communities accountable so that communities want to ensure that their law enforcement treat every resident the same way. An amendment was actually introduced to the bill to try and strip that provision. It came down to a tie, which we've never had in the state of Connecticut. And when it's a tie, the amendment failed. And so that provision remained in the bill. I was proud to vote against that amendment and for civil remedies and to vote for the entire police accountability bill. And now Connecticut has some of the strongest police accountability measures in the country. And I look forward to continuing to work with my colleagues to push those measures forward.
Thank you, Representative. What about you, Councillor Pearlman? Has there been an event this year or an issue like the one that the state rep just described that took place in your district that affected you deeply, profoundly?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. And I want to start by really saying good morning, New England. I love seeing all of your faces. It is such a pleasure to be here with you this morning virtually. I know we can't be together in person. I'm really honored to serve on this panel with such incredible legislators. And I'm really thinking, this is my first term. So imagine I took office in January. I was very excited. I had all of this energy and enthusiasm, right? And then, as was mentioned, in all of the sort of opening remarks, there's been so many pandemics coinciding with one another. And an event that really sticks out for me in the city of Marlborough, where I serve, where I also grew up, we were able to hold several Black Lives Matter protests and rallies, in addition to also having a Juneteenth celebration. And this is something that growing up in the community, people really didn't do protests in Marlborough. Everyone went to a different city. You'd go to Worcester, you would go to Boston. You would not come in our community, even though it's about 40,000 people and incredibly diverse. And so I was really excited to help plan this protest with other organizers. And after like horrible and horrific murders of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and others, there was just such an energy from the community. People were contacting me as their city councilor saying, what can we do about this? How can we come together? And we were fortunate in the city of Marlborough to have the John Brown Bell, which is a system of anti-slavery and activism from the raid on Harper's Ferry with John Brown in our town or city common right in the front. And we were able to convene right there. And it sort of was the convening of a lot of my experiences growing up in the community. There were people that I knew from the Black and Brown community that I'd gone to school with who, were called to speak at this event and to share their stories. We had an open mic and people were, sharing their experiences. And I think it was extremely eye-opening for many that, the problems that we're hearing about, they are close to home as well. And oftentimes we think, there has to be a murder like with George Floyd that, then there needs to be action, but there are things that we can do in our own communities and we need to look inward and do proactive work. So that is something that I'm thinking about constantly because we got so many people together. And I think it really was this eye-opening experience for people to say, you know what, I can do things in my own community and I can show up. And even during the pandemic, right, everyone had their masks and spaced out, but it was a really wonderful gathering. And there's been a lot of other formations now of the anti-racist group in our community that I'm part of. And it's been really wonderful to see that become a long-term commitment rather than just an episodic event.
Thank you, Councilor Pearlman. What about you, Senator-elect Keisha Ram? Which issue emerged this year most important to you and why?
Well, first of all, thanks so much, Charlotte. And it's been great to hear your bio as well. We truly stand on your shoulders and probably a lot of the other women here who have paved the way. And I think about that as we celebrate almost 65 years to the day that Rosa Parks refused to get up on a bus in Montgomery, and Shirley Chisholm's birthday was recently. So we are truly inheriting the grace of a lot of those who have come before us, and that's not lost on me. I want to really relate to that question on a very personal level. So, I grew up in my Indian immigrant father and my Jewish American mother's Irish pub in Los Angeles and found my way to Vermont. And it's been quite a complicated upbringing. And so first of all, I was proud to serve as Kamala Harris's state chair for her presidential run in Vermont. And of course, I was a bit devastated when she suspended her campaign, but so excited and delighted when she became the vice presidential nominee. And I certainly had tears streaming down my face to hear her invoke the name of so many of the women of color who came before her, including her mother, because being able to share in that experience for BIPOC women, for the children of immigrants, was incredibly cathartic for me and so many other folks. And it's at the same time really marked, of course, by the other ongoing pandemics that others have mentioned. Given my complex multiracial background, it was just a couple days after George Floyd's murder that my mother called me and we were talking, and I'll just always remember sitting in the parking lot of Costco when she said to me, as she's white, I think you've had a really different life experience than I've ever really been able to acknowledge. And I think for those of us who are multiracial, it's sometimes so hard to stand in that middle ground and know that you're trying to weave together a lot of perspectives across difference, even in your own family. And I was arrested when I was 13 in Los Angeles for curfew, which is really, no one even knows that there is a curfew in Los Angeles, with my friends. And the first question they asked us was, are you Mexican? And the second question was, are you sure you're not Mexican? And so, just having all of those experiences come up at the same time that, after George Floyd's murder happened, a lot of folks in my community and across the country reached out, gave donations, and said, I don't know what else to do, but I know I can help elect the first woman of color to the state Senate. So please, do something with this. And that's a tremendous gift and responsibility that so many of us hold, not just to be a face or an idea, but to make the lives of others better. You will hear later, if you're fortunate enough to, from Kaya Morris, who used to serve in our legislature and was really pushed out by racially motivated harassment and threats and violence to her family. We are losing another Black woman who's an elected official in Vermont to the strain of her visibility and lack of safety. And we've just had a third Black woman elected in Vermont or appointed in the Hartford Select Board. And in 48 hours, she's faced so much hostility and violence and ill will that she's not sure if she can continue on. So I take very seriously that I'm just trying to open the door a little wider for other people who still don't have safety and a sense of place and community in our states.
And opening the door, you certainly are, all three of you are, and being role models and showing when somebody, takes a step through that door, others of us can see that, and it helps us all gain confidence. Thank you. Okay, so let's shift a little bit away from the events of 2020. We certainly could stay on that for the entire time because so much has happened. But let's go on to this idea of women working with women, supporting one another. And someone has said, others have said as well, that there's a special place in heaven for women who support each other, women who support one another. And for myself, I am a big advocate for kitchen cabinets and advisory committees and bringing women together and helping to really chart an agenda and a course for women to follow in their leadership journey. So the attendees of this conference, I imagine, who are here are used to supporting each other, and that is something that's a common philosophy. But we can learn from your experience. So tell us, how has the support of women contributed to your success? And this time, let's start with Counselor at Large, Samantha Pearlman.
Thank you. And I absolutely love this question because I feel like even on this call, I know there are several of my Emerge Massachusetts classmates on here. And so definitely, going off of Kesha's remarks too about how we stand on the shoulders of so many other women. I'm the youngest woman elected in my community, but there are other women who have served. We recently even held a suffrage event to, and brought back a lot of the women who have served on the school committee and the city council. And there were 40 years that separated the first woman elected to the school committee, another 40 years to the first woman to the city council, another 40 years to the first mayor that was a woman in our community. And I definitely, when I decided to run for office, I think everyone told me no. They were like, you're too young, you don't have the name recognition or the experience. And I remember even attending this conference 2 years ago and being so inspired by all of the women that I saw leading the change, right? There is no change without challenge. Running for office is a very challenging thing. It's very vulnerable and you're putting yourself out there. And I remember kind of finding my way to Emerge. And when I got to join the program, I felt like I didn't belong, right? I was the youngest one in the program, and I felt just honestly so in awe of every individual's story of what brought them with the desire to serve their community, whether they were going to run right now or run in the future. And I would not be able to stand here and even be speaking as an elected official if it wasn't for the countless women who have stood up for me and said, you know what, your voice is valuable and we need to hear it. We need to hear more from you. And whether it was knocking on doors or donating to my campaign, or being that year when I was like, what am I even doing, right after I talked to somebody who, said something extremely rude to me, or the people who were willing to sit there and let me, vent about the day that I had, because it really is that sort of consistent support network that is what allows women to serve in office and stay in office. You know, it's one thing to run, but to be retained as an elected official is really challenging. So I even was able to work with young women in the community that were high school students, and they got to vote for the very first time and vote in a local election and cast their ballot for me. And it was just really inspiring to know that I'm building that pipeline and that it really is a movement. So, you know, someone like myself will come and go, but there are openings, as Kesha said, right, the door being open. We really do have a responsibility to ensure that, you know, we may be the first, but we're definitely not the last. And I think that that's so important. And I just see every time I meet someone who is excited to run, I'm always, you know, open to anyone here, anyone interested in running, please contact me. I'm willing to talk to anybody and tell it to you straight. You know, it wasn't easy. You know, there were many times where I realized, you know, I was working a full-time job and I was knocking doors all the time, and people would, you know, ask how many kids I had or what my maiden name was before they even asked me a policy position or a platform about myself. And so I think we have a lot of work to do. And it's only because of the women that supported me and the ones that are, you know, in this space that we're able to move forward. And so I encourage all of you to, you know, to support those local women that you know and inspire them to take the next step, because we need your leadership, right? We know the time is now, and it's more vital than ever before.
And I will add that as elected officials, when those rude things are said, we can handle them, you know, with humor, even when we have a posse, so to speak, women backing us up, right? So who will, you know, support us through those things. Let's go to Senator-elect Ram. Share with us, you know, your thoughts about how women have supported you, please.
Thanks so much. And I can only build off of what Sam said, but it's a perfect moment to invoke the name and spirit of my mentor and my honorary grandmother, Governor Madeline Kunin, our first and only female governor in Vermont. She's incredibly tireless about meeting with almost anyone, but particularly women, about their aspirations and ambitions. And I don't know, you know, I just was not a natural politician at the age of 21 when I was running, and I went to go meet with her for the first time, wearing a hoodie, sweatshirt, and jeans and flip-flops. And she never said a word about it. She endorsed me in my campaign, and only later, several years later in the State House, I was wearing a nice vintage tweed suit, and she said, "You do clean up nicely. I don't know if you remember what you wore when we first met." And I was so mortified. But, you know, so often you feel like you could be easily written off. I looked like an intern, and I probably still will, even as a state senator. And yet it takes, you know, often other women to see the value in what you're contributing, what you're putting forth, what you're saying, and what you have to bring to the table. And speaking, she was the first person to say to me, and I know this is attributed to various female leaders, but if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And so it really gave me the courage I needed to keep going. And she once said to me, you know, I said, "Madeline, you know, people keep calling me ambitious and acting like it's a bad thing. And I don't know how to, you know, hide that. I'm 21, I'm running for the legislature." And she said, "Well, you are ambitious, and that's not a bad thing because you follow through. And that's really different. To be ambitious with follow through is what we need." And so, you know, that really changed my framing for so many things. But also to build on what Sam said, you know, I draw strength from women that are younger than me as well. I often will say to them, "I'm not going to tell you, you give me hope," because that sounds like our generations are just kind of giving up and putting it all on Gen Z. But they give me courage, because they are leading in ways that I can barely imagine, even in my 30s. And they're not asking for permission. They're not seeking to be liked, but to be heard and respected. And, you know, that is really something that I draw a lot of courage and strength from. So we're all in this together, and, you know, we just need to take risks together and hold each other through that.
Thank you. Representative Gilchrist, I wonder, with you, your perspective around this issue, you know, did women working on your campaign or in the community who are involved in helping you with your policy positions? And also want to know if you'd say something just about the fact that you are an amazing role model for your own children. What are your thoughts about that?
Thank you. And, I echo what has been said, because we wouldn't be where we are today without all the women who came before. And I've certainly had amazing mentors in my life who I can still call on for advice, but as Sam said, also to vent, when things are frustrating. And so, yes, when I decided to challenge a 23-year male incumbent for the State House, I was able to call on my relationships and the network I had built. And so out of a 17-member kitchen cabinet, which is what I called it, only 2 men, 15 women. And that team of women worked so hard, and I was able to defeat him by 150 votes in a primary. And working with women, we were written off. We were, little girls. I was called some young woman. Wasn't my turn. But I had studied. We had all studied. We did the work. I knocked on the doors, and having that community and strength of women pushed me over the finish line. I thank you so much for bringing up my children, because that has been the unintended reward of all of this. I don't think I would have engaged my children in politics, but because of the nature of what I'm doing, they are. And my daughter is 8 and my son is 11. I'll tell 2 quick stories. My son came home recently and said, "So, Joe Biden was the vice president for Barack Obama." And I said, "Yes." And he said, "And that woman you like?" I said, "Yes, Kamala Harris. Yes, she's now going to be the vice president for Joe Biden." I said, "Yes." And he said, "So that means she can be president?" And I said, "Yes, it does, Donnie. Yes, it does." And then my daughter, she'll introduce me as, "Have you met my mom? She's Jillian Gilchrist," which is sometimes a bit much, but the pride she has, the engagement they have in politics, it is natural to them that their mom is a leader, and that truly is just something I never expected. The final piece I'll say is because of what I've been given by women, I give back. And so I've been taking interns from the moment it was possible. Whenever women want to meet for coffee, or nowadays via Zoom, I'm there. Because I truly think it takes us all to continue to bring folks along so that we can continue this movement forward.
Okay, wonderful. And I want to offer a little bit of advice for you all. As I listen to you, have such great stories, and I wish we had more time. But I just think as you're going along this, this journey, this road in elective office, that somehow you jot down some notes from the experience, right? Who has time for that? But it would be great for you to do that, because when you look back, you will want to recall these things, to keep some of the articles, to put together a scrapbook if you can. I know that's time that you probably feel like you don't have, but I think now with my own experience on the other side, I have appreciated being able to look back at these things with my own daughters, who are like your kids' age, Jillian. So, okay, let's move on. And I want to say for myself, I appreciate your thoughtful responses. With this remaining time, I wonder, maybe we'll incorporate your closing remarks in this. But I want you to talk a little bit more about this idea of collective impact and women supporting each other, and maybe take advantage of the fact that you have this amazing audience before us today. And share with us, is there an action that we can take? Is there some issue that you are championing that we can get behind, that we should know about at the very least, or that we should try to bring to our respective states? And I wonder this time I'd ask that we start with the Rep Gilchrist.
Yes.
For 2021, we know we can't do it now, but.
Yeah, so yes, and to see 184 folks on this conference, yes. So as was mentioned, I have been working in the anti-sexual violence movement for some time now, and I want to thank all of those who have worked on campuses to push forward reforms to Title IX and the Me Too movement, because our cultural understanding of sexual violence is at an all-time high. We can talk about it in ways we've never been able to talk about it before. And so where I'm moving in 2021 is to ensure that our policies reflect that cultural understanding, because culture and policy go hand in hand. And right now, our policies are lagging. And so our policies are still based on force and resistance. And they come from the presumption of consent, which means that it's permissible to sexually penetrate a person unless they indicate they're unwilling. And as we all know, that is absurd. And so I am building on the work of another woman, Erin Murphy with the American Law Institute, who has been championing efforts to update the model penal code regarding sexual assault since 2012. Now again, we all, interestingly, Erin had a baby that year, I had a baby that year, and another partner had a baby that year. That's been 8 years she's been working on this. And so I intend to introduce legislation this year to define consent, but to also create a policy that reflects what we all know to be true, that it is impermissible to sexually penetrate a person unless that person indicates willingness. And so I intend this to be a journey because, as we know, culture change is hard. Well, policy change sometimes is even harder. And so I'd love folks to join me in these efforts to update our sexual assault criminal statutes in Connecticut and throughout New England.
Thank you for that. And again, if you're just joining this conference now, the panelists will include their contact information, or we will include it on their behalf, so you can be in touch with them in their offices post-conference. Let's go, Chancellor Pearlman, what about you, 2021? What's in store, and what issues should we be supporting?
Absolutely, and I really appreciate Jillian's suggestions as well, and I will also be trying to follow up on what everyone's talking about, so it's exciting to hear what's happening in other states. Something that I'm really thinking about is how we change the face of leadership, and there's a story that some people who know me really well, that kind of really changed my perspective when I'm running, I want to share with you all now, and kind of encourage you to get more involved in your local communities. And I know that's something I sort of talked about a little bit earlier, but I think is really important, because sometimes, we think, just that small act is not enough, but it's really important. And we've seen so much engagement, right, in the 2020 election and all of this energy. And then people are like, oh, okay, we're done. And I'm going to say, you are just beginning. We need you, all 4 years between presidential elections. And so when I was running for office and canvassing, early on, I would always talk to people when I was going around. And I went up to one older couple and kind of introduced myself and clearly stated that I was the candidate. I said, oh, my name is Samantha Pearlman. I'm running for counselor at large. And, and the man just smiled and said, oh, are you the candidate's wife? And I remember thinking, what just happened in my head, and saying, no, sir, I am the candidate. And I feel like we need to see women in every single space, whether it's joining a board and commission, or showing up to testify at a public hearing at your local city council, or at a state representative, at the state house, or being able to run for office yourself. Sometimes, we need to change who is in leadership, and that's the biggest change that we can really make. And so I'm encouraging all of you, women are asked 7 times to run for office. So I'm asking you to run for office and be one of those people, and vote in your local elections and your state elections. That is where the votes matter the most. And oftentimes they're so overlooked. And I know when I was running, people were saying, oh, this is the first time I'm going to vote in a local election. And I said, please don't make it the last, because we need you showing up. And oftentimes there is a small minority making the decisions for the entire community, just because there isn't enough information out there and no one is reminding them. So 2021 is often a local election year, and it might be different depending on where you live, but please pay attention and ask those hard questions, because the things that we are asking for from our state and federal leaders are the same things that we should be asking for at the local level, right? Healthcare manifests itself locally, even like social justice work, the environment. These decisions are being made by people that are in your neighborhoods or in your community. And oftentimes they're saying, oh, I voted this way, no one talked to me, and that's not the response they should be giving, because you need to show up and tell them how they should be acting. So I'm encouraging you to do that. And the last thing that I would encourage is to assess the diversity of your network. Oftentimes we hold all of these ideals just theoretically, and then I ask you to think about the 10 people that you would reach out to if you had a problem right now. And think about the race, the gender, the sexual orientation of those individuals, and ask yourself, am I really having a good representation of our United States of America when I'm asking, for support? And who are the people that I'm talking to about the issues? Because if we're talking to people that look just like us, then we are also part of the problem. So I'm encouraging you to reach out to communities that are from different parts of, experience than you, and really showing up for them and listening, and not starting with, asking for things, but really showing up to say, I want to help and support and amplify your work. What can I do? So those are the things. Be active in your local community, and please vote locally. Run for office yourself. And if not, please join a board and commission. And then please diversify your network and make sure that you're leading with inclusion, not only in your values, but in your actions, because that is what we need the most right now. Thank you.
That's a very powerful statement. All of what you said, but the idea that you can tell a lot about our views on diversity by the company we keep. So let's think about that for 2021. Thank you for all of that. Senator-elect Keisha Ram, you get the last word, and we know what you're going to be doing. You're busy making history as the first woman of color with your swearing into the state Senate. Is there an issue, though, that you ran on or that you care about that we should get behind?
Oh my goodness. Well, first of all, I feel like my neck is hurting from nodding so much. I'm a very visual listener, so I'm just loving what's already been said. And I feel like there's this continuum. If you think about what Jillian said, when you elect women and people of color to office, the priorities change, the conversations change. We're talking about the least heard and the least empowered, and we're lifting them up. So, a lot of my priorities have to do with racial, social, environmental, and economic justice. And, I have to give some credit to Donald Trump, and I know this is a weird place to do it, but prior to 2016, a lot of people in the legislature called those initiatives that I introduced, whether it was independent investigation into police use of force or changing Christopher Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day, they called them solutions in search of problems. We don't have a racial justice problem here. We don't have these issues here. A lot has changed. I really feel like I have the wind at my back, going into the legislature, and then building off that with what Sam said, that if you have a lot of those other women and leaders around you, and you figure out ways for them to, feel empowered enough to be elected, then the people around you having that conversation changes, which is a really great thing for the legislative process. So underneath all of that is some of the nerdiest and least splashy issues that are some of the most important. And what I'm talking about are voter enfranchisement, redistricting, and campaign finance reform. So as you all look to run for office or support someone running for office, you're going to all of a sudden realize there are a lot of barriers to doing that. You have big districts that feel unwieldy. You don't know where to start. A lot of us are involved in Emerge. I was there with Governor Kunin in her living room founding Emerge Vermont. But we just went through a census process that will lead us to the next redistricting and drawing the boundaries of all of our legislative districts from local to congressional. And that makes a huge difference for who's able to serve. So just as an example, our county is where I represent as a senator is the largest in the state. It's about a quarter of the Democratic vote in the state. And instead of having 6 at-large members in this county, we're going to break it up into probably 3 separate districts. And I am poised to take advantage of that to make sure more women and people of color see an opportunity to run, because it's not as daunting and it's not as hard to balance all that constituent work with having young kids. And our state is working to make, we just made childcare something that you can claim in your campaign finance report. It is a campaign expenditure. All of the barriers that we face to making sure that you can make sure your life is taken care of, your family's taken care of, and run for office are barriers we need to reduce. And so these are issues we often forget, but we're in a really important redistricting year. We have seen in this election what happens when you give Black women money and resources and the leadership to accomplish something, and it completely transformed the country. So we need to enfranchise more voters. And remember that many people side with us and agree with us, but they are prevented from voting and they're prevented from having a voice, and poverty and other interrelated issues keep them down. And so we have to address all of this to have a truly functional, sound democracy. And so sorry to nerd out on all of you, but it's just such a critical issue, and redistricting is way more important than a lot of people realize.
Fantastic. State Senator-elect Keisha Ram, Counselor at Large Samantha Pearlman, and State Representative Jillian Gilchrist, thank you for your powerful, inspirational, thought-provoking words this morning. Back to you, our moderator, Maria Gonzalez Albuquerque.
Thank you so much, everybody, for your participation in this amazing, amazing conversation. I have to say that I loved seeing all the movement in the chat. I know that you guys have been checking what was happening on the chat, but it was like everybody was noting and like putting their flavor into what was happening. And I loved seeing people from all over the place, really learning from 3 different perspectives about how to approach change and move forward. And thank you, Charlotte, for your amazing, amazing job doing this.